Hey everybody, welcome back to another Kitecast episode. This is Patrick Spencer. I am here with my guest, Sylvain Hirsch. He is an incident responder over at Mandiant. He's a university professor. He's done a little bit of lecturing over at Interpol. You name it, he has done it, including rugby, and we're going to touch on that subject during today's conversation. Sylvain, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. Rarely, if ever, do we get a chance to chat about rugby. So maybe we start there. So you were on the Swiss National Rugby Team, I think, for about 8, 9, 10 years, somewhere in that vicinity. How did you get into rugby in the first place, and how did you end up on the national team? And were you traveling all the time, all around the world, playing in all these matches?
I mean, I love talking about rugby because also there's so many things that I've learned through rugby that I'm applying in my daily job as well. I think I just started to play rugby because I was a bit hyperactive when I was a kid. And I love to be challenged, and we can also see that within my day-to-day job. I like working with people and also working with people to achieve the same goal, same at work or same on the rugby pitch. I like to be challenged. I like to perform. So there's all this parallel between work and rugby. I've been playing for the Swiss National Rugby Team for almost 10 years, traveling mainly in Europe. Great experience playing against great players as well. And that's brought me so many skills that I'm using in my personal life as well as professional life.
Interesting. Any big match wins that you guys had during the course of your 10 years? What sticks out for you?
That was probably not with the Swiss rugby team, but playing sevens with a team named the Switzers, playing against France, South Africa sevens. Some good challenging game. We didn't win these 2 games, but we managed to challenge them well enough to be proud at the end of the day. When I started with the Swiss team, we were, I think, 70th on the world ranking. And just before COVID, we're in the top 30. So we've been becoming better and better. But one day it's hard to reach, I don't know, the top 15 or the top 6 or 7 to be part of the World Cup.
So what position did you play?
Center or fullback, mainly everywhere in the backs, but center or fullback mainly. I hope people know about rugby. Otherwise, they would just keep that podcast and say, okay, it's a rugby podcast. No, we're talking about cybersecurity there as well. It's coming. Stay tuned.
Well, there's a lot of probably analogies or parallels in rugby. It's a team sport. Incident response, certainly, which is what you're doing right now, is a team sport in many ways. And it's also a huge challenge. And rugby, for anyone who's ever watched it, is not for the faint of heart, needless to say, right? So I assume there's some lessons learned that you can take from all the time you spent playing rugby that has carried over into your cybersecurity digital forensics career.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for bringing that topic. That's really a topic close to my heart, honestly. So I think there's so many parallels. I think the first parallel, I think in rugby, you can't achieve anything as an individual. You have to play with everyone. You have to play with small, tall player, skinny, more heavy player, strong player, rapid player. And you have to bring all these people to achieve the same goal. Also, you have people from different backgrounds. You've got someone working as a worker, someone which could be the CEO and making millions a year. And we all have a personal life and personal problem. So at the end of the day is how can we get everyone's strength to achieve the same goal? And I see that within my daily job. I'm an incident responder. So I'm facing incident, large cyber incident every day. If I take a ransomware as an example, the client will call me and I will be the face from the company. I will be basically the captain of the team because I'm facing the client to lead the incident. However, there's so many people in the background. So there's all the analysts analyzing what's going on. There's also sometimes we require malware analysts because we don't have time to do a full malware investigation while investigating compromised system. So we just submit a sample to an outstanding malware analyst team. On top of that, we've got all the attribution part and the intel part, because we do incident response driven by intelligence. So it's like, who is conducting this attack? Do we know who is the threat actors behind that? And all this information provided by this team will make our investigation way more efficient, and we will be able to quickly resolve the problem, investigate the incident to limit the impact on the business. So there's all this team that has to work in synergy, and basically we're taking the best of everyone. Like, I can do malware analysis, but I'm not the best malware analyst ever. But I've got that awesome team. So as soon as I find something complex, I send it to that team. They come back with relevant findings while I'm working on something else. So same as rugby in incident response, you just have to work together to achieve the same goal, which is basically investigating rapidly to limit the impact on the business. And if I may just add something, I think like over the last few years, we probably saw a shift within organization. We used to probably work, every organization was just trying to fight its own like cyber breach. But today we see like a bigger collaboration between the public and private sectors. We saw that recently with recent cyber breach where, like, for example, Mandiant will call CrowdStrike. We used to be like just seen as a competitors. So the two CEO will call each other and say, oh, have you seen that? Have you seen that advanced threat actors within your network, within your client network? And together, before releasing that news publicly, they're just going to work together to get more information just in order to protect everyone and every organization correctly, and obviously all our clients.
That's interesting. We'll talk a little about your role over at Mandiant, now Google, that the acquisition is official. But you bring up an interesting point. So before I lose my thought on this topic, internal versus external notification, your latest report, I think is the 2022 report that was published earlier this year, actually went into some detail around, it is geographically based as well, I believe, internal notifications versus external notifications. When someone actually finds out that they have a problem, how do they find out about it? Is it an internal resource? Do they discover it themselves, or is it someone else outside the organization telling them? What trends do you see happening in this arena, and why is it trending in that direction?
So I think I will probably have to go back to the internal report 2022 just to provide you right numbers. So I don't have the report like handy right now, but I will say there's few ways to discover a cyber breach. It could be internal, like it could be discovered internally thanks to all our technology. Like if you got an alert and the SOC is doing a good job to investigate and understand that something bad is going on, and if for resilience and more mature organization to be able to detect that at the first stage of the attack, where basically there's no impact. You don't really want to discover that you've been hacked for years and that the threat actors has been stealing data for like 4 years. So you could detect cyber incident internally. Obviously, we try to reduce the amount of time to detect this attack. We also can basically detect attacks thanks to like external organization like our companies, for example, which monitor the dark web monitor the dark web and any website where, for example, threat actors will sell access to any organization. So if we see like a company X access is getting sold on the dark web, we do victim notification. So hopefully you will be notified enough and be able to mitigate that threat before someone buy the access from that threat actors. And I will say you can also get notified by law enforcement, or maybe one day just discover that directly in the news. And that's probably the worst case scenarios, where you got a threat actors that publicly announce that it's been exfiltrating a large amount of data for years or whatever, and that your data is available. And that's the way you realize that you got breached.
What's typically the breakdown there? Do most organizations actually discover it internally and then they tap external sources to figure out exactly what's happening as they analyze the data and they do a digital forensics trail? Or, is it a growing number that actually aren't aware they have a problem and then suddenly something comes out of the news, or they're contacted by an external entity, or one of their supply chain partners perhaps contacts them and lets them know that they've had a problem and they're seeing some potential malicious activity happening in regards to their connections to the parent entity? What's the trend there in terms of what you guys are seeing?
I think we see, these obviously kind of all the scenario that you mentioned, to be honest. It really depends. When there's a third party, like a third party getting breached, or like a supply chain attack, where basically, like with SolarWind, Fire will announce that we got breached, and then provide indicator of compromise to provide the ability to other organizations to determine if they could breach or not. And then you got hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that realize that they got breached as well. So in that case, they will get notified by third parties. So, it can come from anywhere. Like I will say, what we try to do is to work with organizations to make them more mature in order to provide them the ability to detect that, to detect cyber threat and cyber incidents early in the kill chain, in order to prevent, data exfiltration, ransomware being deployed, or even having any nations conducting some cyber espionage for years within the environment.
Oh, that's very true. Great recommendations. All right, let's talk a little bit about your career beyond rugby. So you're playing rugby. You've been in the university for a number of years. You have several different degrees. You landed over at Mandiant in 2021. Before that, you spent about 4 years, I think, over at Credit Suisse doing digital forensics as well as incident response in several different roles and levels of responsibility. Talk about the evolution of your career and how did you end up at Mandiant and what are you doing now?
So good question. How did I end up there? So, I started with a master degree in digital forensic. And then I wanted to do my master thesis within a corporate organization. And I really wanted to do that master thesis within an organization that was not a cybersecurity organization, because I wanted to understand the complexity to work for any organization where cybersecurity is not the core business. So it's very easy as a consultancy company to provide the best recommendation. But when we deal with customer, we understand that these business stakeholders beyond that don't want to, for example, improve the cyber security or to deploy a technology because they're afraid that that could have an impact on the organization. So that's why I started to work for a bank, because that provided me the complexity of a large network, and also to understand that cybersecurity was just an additional risk. I had the chance to work for Credit Suisse for years, first in Zurich, then in Singapore. And after a certain amount of years working for them, I just wanted to learn from the best, to improve my knowledge, and also to have the ability to see what most other people don't see, to work on APT, like advanced persistent threat. When you work for an organization, you don't want a ransomware to happen, but as a cybersecurity expert, you want to be able to experience that, to know how to deal with it, and also to be better at preventing that type of attack. So I joined Mandiant to really learn from the best. And over the last year now, I've had the chance to work on several APT attack. I had the chance to work on large ransomware cases, on some Linux forensic. And now, actually, I'm moving on with my career. I'm going to join the strategy team to help the organization to be better prepared to face cyber incidents. So really to improve the cyber maturity, to improve the detection capabilities, to also conduct simulations. Just for organization to just upskill help and get better at protecting, detecting, and responding to cyber threat. So I will be more on the proactive side than just on the reactive side as well.
Interesting. So you get to straddle both sides of the fence in a way, right? So, which gives you additional experience. Now, you also do some lecturing, I think, over at BFH in Switzerland. What classes do you teach? I assume they're in the area of digital forensics. And how long have you been teaching there? I think this is a a recent endeavor. How did you end up doing the teaching gig, the university professor assignment?
So just to be precise, I'm not doing any teaching at BFH. I'm simply reviewing master theses, and there's one outstanding master thesis which is coming up from a CAS student over there soon. I hope it's going to be published then, because there's a lot of good work that has been done over there. And actually, I'm starting as a guest lecturer next year at University of Lausanne, where I'm going to provide a few lectures about incident response, intelligence, and also ransomware remediation. There's two reasons why I wanted to be part of the academic world and to teach is, first, I love sharing knowledge. Also, by staying close to the university, you also understand what's coming next. And I can also right now provide some practical experience to some students.
Well, that's a good segue. I was about to ask you about ransomware. There's a lot of data on ransomware in the latest Mandiant report, and I think in the 2023 projections report. So if listeners are tuned into this podcast, make sure you check out both of those documents from Mandiant. They're filled full of very, very useful information. But ransomware trends seem to be going down a little bit. Does that mean that the threat or the risk associated with ransomware is decreasing a bit anyway? And my second question, which is associated with ransomware, is there a difference between ransomware and extortion? I noticed there's a section, I think, in the 2023 projections document on extortion versus ransomware. Is it the same? Is it different?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, the decrease of ransomware. I've been discussing with a lot of friends working in the industry, and a few months back they told me, yeah, we are seeing a decrease of ransomware. And I was like, personally, I don't. I still receive call from clients on the day-to-day basis. So first, before talking about the decrease of ransomware, I think it is important just to mention that we only see what we see. We only see what organization, client, individual, government want to report. So we don't have the full visibility, even if we got a good visibility on the cyber threat landscape, thanks to cyber threat intelligence and all the incidents that we've been working on. But I think we are currently seeing a decrease of ransomware incidents targeting the US. However, we also, in parallel, we're also seeing an increase of ransomware incidents in Europe and in APG. And based on the M-Trend report, not the M-Trend report, the Mandiant forecast report for 2023, we are expecting an increase of ransomware incidents in Europe and in Asia. These could be related to the maturity level that is increasing for organizations in the US, whereas probably Europe and APG or APAC are probably a bit slower in that cyber resiliency journey. So it is not too late, but just get ready and just get prepared. That's what I always say is like, even if it's like impossible to predict the futures, it is important to understand what threat actors do and to understand what's the next cyber threat. Like that, we can get better prepared and like improve our capability, and like we can just be ready. And we've been seeing that with some organization. And if we take the example of Ukraine, we've been working a lot with Ukraine, and a lot of organizations are helping Ukraine or any other like organization getting hit by Russia, for example. And we can see that with good readiness and preparedness, we're able to detect destructive attack quickly, but also to remediate cyber attack quickly or like quicker. That's why I always say to organization, you don't want to basically try to understand how to do a password reset or how to contain system when you're facing a cyber incident. Get ready, have this process in place, have the management also ready to handle that kind of stuff. Because sometimes the management will have to take decision, and this decision would have a business impact. All right, cool. Let's shut down the network for 24 hours. Obviously, we've got an impact. But like, is it better to shut down the network for 24 hours or to have the entire network getting encrypted and then we won't be able to work properly? So I will say, get prepared, get ready, and just go through simulation. improve the awareness of your management, improve the awareness of like everyone, because cybersecurity is like everyone's responsibility.
And we have all heard the saying, it's not a matter of if, it's when you're going to experience that cyber attack that's successful. We've seen a number of instances where organizations simply didn't understand the breadth of the attack and what had been breached. There was one about a month ago. I'm not going to name the organization, but it was an organization where they thought it was basic PII data that had been exfiltrated, was being held ransom. They decided they weren't going to pay the ransom. And then it turns out that the data that had been was being held ransom, was released on the dark web, was mental health records and other things. And that was the last thing I think that they expected to see. So, being prepared in advance, obviously, is highly critical, in having those processes in place, but then having the right partner when it does happen to determine through digital forensics what actually was accessed and what has been exfiltrated versus what wasn't is critical. And I think that instance is a great lesson. Can you speak to the fact that it's preparation, but it's also, the day of, the day after, that activity is just as important?
So I think you're just mentioning something very interesting, and I published recently about it. I think it's like, first, it is key to get the right partner and the right partnership before anything happens, to know who is going to support us to conduct an investigation. So we speak about incident response retainer services, and there is some great company that could help organization to investigate and remediate cyber incident quickly. I think it's just important to understand that a cyber investigation could be very complex, and the impact to large cyber attack could be huge. So having this partnership in place beforehand help to speed up the entire process. What's the role and responsibility of every stakeholders, of the partner, but also internally? Who is going to take which decision? So we talk sometime about like tabletop exercise, which are very high level. But a tabletop exercise provides the ability, if it's a technical tabletop exercise, touch base first, provide the ability to the technical team to understand how they're going to conduct the investigation. What's the step that will need to be taken to quickly remediate? How can they escalate it properly to the management? How could they escalate it properly to the crisis management? And then when we talk about ransomware data exfiltration, it goes just a level above. And that's where we can simulate that type of attack with an ETTX, executive tabletop exercise, where basically, what are you going to do if a threat actor is asking you for ransom, and if you don't pay it, they will publish critical data on the dark web. All these questions and how are you going to communicate? We've seen a trend, and I think that's a good trend, with company and CEO and CISO publicly and proactively announce that they got breached. That they're currently investigating the cyber attack. Obviously, they don't have much information most of the time. So first, they don't have much information, and they don't want to share much information to protect the investigation. So I think that communication part is very important, and we can all get prepared. How are we going to handle that situation? Who is going to speak? Is that the CISO, like the Chief Information Security Officer? Is that the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer? Like, what's the assessment that we're going to do? So we can prepare like all the stakeholders proactively in order just to communicate quickly. I personally think that proactive communication is one of the best things in today's cyber world, because we've seen, and you talk about extortion before. Right now, threat actors deploy ransomware, but also conduct data exfiltration to force organization to pay ransom. They're financially motivated. They want organization to pay ransom. Then I mentioned it in my last presentation at MWise a few weeks back in Washington. Everyone is going to get hit by ransomware. Everyone is going to get breached one day. So just get prepared. Like, even the most sophisticated cyber organization, and FireEye, was hit by SolarWinds. We managed to find the breach, but we got hit. That's it. So get prepared. That's the only thing. Get prepared, get the management aware, and yeah, just simulate cyber incidents.
Great recommendations, spot on. And it's, our local hospital a few weeks ago was hit, guess what, with a ransomware attack. And the systems were down for a couple of days while they tried to figure out what they were going to do. It's inevitable, unfortunately. You brought up Ukraine. Mandiant's done a lot of work this past year since the war in Ukraine started. Can you talk a bit about some of the things that you've seen? Have we, it seems that the doomsday cybersecurity, cyber threat events that everyone was talking about when the war started never really seemed to come to fruition. Is that true? But what have you been able to observe in terms of the activity that's happened outside of Russia within Ukraine itself, as well as in other nations that have been supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia?
I think we've seen like an increase of cyber attack and especially like destructive cyber attack overall. And we can also expect that basically we can expect Russia to conduct cyber action and cyber like attack against every state that basically put sanction on Russia. So I think we just have to be ready for that. I think something which is very interesting that just basically like which is linked up with what I said before is if we're getting ready, we saw that organization can quickly recover from incidents. So I will say even if we see like an increase of destructive attack, by having organization getting ready and like Ukraine have been ready for years, like trying to improve its cybersecurity resiliency, because they had a blackout a few years back, I think it's 2016, 2017, where they got hit. Actually, I don't remember what type of attack was it. Maybe that was ransomware, but they got hit, and basically they didn't have any electricity for days. So I think it's very important to just understand that by simply being ready for it and having the right process in place and understand what's the action to be undertaken once we're getting hit, we can just quickly recover from it. It's not going, no one is going to recover within like 2 hours, but the impact could be highly limited. And I think that's just key. And like, again, we don't do cybersecurity for fun. It's like, that's why I said to my mom and like to my friends and like even to cybersecurity professional, we don't do cybersecurity for fun. We do cybersecurity to enable the business to operate properly or to have any state to operate properly. So I think we just have to understand that we do cybersecurity to protect anything to work accordingly to the plan. And that's it. And I think we realize that is how can we make sure that even and when that organization that we try to protect is hit by anything, how can we ensure that we're going to move on quickly to have the right processes in place to quickly remediate cyber incidents?
And we hear a lot about the axis of rogue nation states, or however you want to describe them: North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia. So I assume the threats posed by those four nations certainly is not going to go down in 2023. But I found something interesting in the 2023 projections report that I'd like you to comment on. Then you can comment on the axis of four if you want. But the first item in the report said there'll be more attacks by non-organized attackers and non-nation state attackers. So do you see the trend going back in the other direction, where it's going to be cyber gangs or rogue individuals who are going to be instigating these attacks? Or what does that mean in the report? I found that a fascinating projection.
I think the big four, as they were recently called, like Iran, Russia, North Korea, and China, are still going to conduct even like destructive attack, like for Russia mainly, and like China is going to continue doing some cyber espionage to gain some intelligence property from organization, but also to gain some intelligence and also to gain maybe to disrupt a bit some election. There's a lot of election coming up in Asia, for example, and we know that like China has been conducting cyber espionage for years. So we can still expect these big four to still conducting destructive and like intelligence or like information gathering type of attack. I find it very interesting to see the new trend coming up, because we usually we've got kind of two main type of threat actor group, is like APT, Advanced Persistent Threat Actor Group, which has often linked to a nation behind. Or we've got FIN, Financial Motivated Threat Actors. But yeah, we see currently some gang, we can call it, like some cyber criminal that are like conducting cyber like activities. Obviously, they could be a bit financially motivated, but they're just proud to announce that they breach into a big organization. So they will then use like and publish on the dark web or on their Telegram group that they breach into that organization. That was super easy, and they just proud like. So I think it's very interesting to see this young, basically unstructured threat actors conducting cyber incident that could have a massive impact. And I think that's very important to understand that, like, the kids behind a keyboard, like a smart kids behind a keyboard with enough time and resource and knowledge can breach into many networks. And obviously we see like if some of them will be easily detectable because they don't use good security operation skill. I'm just really interested to understand how this emergence of threat actor group, where are they going to go? Like, what are they going to do next? Are they just be happy to bridge to a network, or are they going to become the next financial motivated threat actor group?
Reputation and financial gain is motivating this new generation of cyber hackers, it sounds like.
It sounds like that. To be honest, I haven't faced recently any like type of attack, but like, yeah, we've seen more of them thanks to our great intelligence team that provided some great data. Yeah, that's why we're seeing. I'm not on the dark web every day, but we've got researchers, we've got guys on the dark web every day that are basically monitoring specific threat actor blogs, and they've been seeing that increase, and they see that every day. So it's really interesting also to discuss with them to understand what's next. And that's where, I mean, it just came back to knowing what's next help defender to better prevent and detect cyber incidents. That's why I always speak about intelligence-driven incident response, but it's just like intelligence-driven cyber operation, because it's not only intelligence enable us to prevent, to detect, to respond, and remediate cyber incident properly. So with good intelligence on threat actors, with good collaboration between public and private sectors, and to have these intelligence sharing, we can just all together prevent and limit the impact on the society.
Speaking about the impact on society, for the last few years, both of us have read the articles and seen the news reports around industrial control systems, supervisory systems, SCADA, and that they're a prime target for particularly the rogue nation states, maybe even for these who are seeking, a reputation, bringing down a big water plant, bringing down a power plant and so forth. Do you see an influx in terms of attacks on these systems? Because more and more of them are being exposed to the internet. Previously, technically, they weren't exposed, and we know that they've found ways to go in through the electrical grid and so forth to even hack some of those systems in the past. But where are we in regards to attacks on these systems? But then how does that equate to the preparedness we have from an incident response standpoint when protecting them?
So I think from like an incident response perspective, it doesn't change much, because most of the time to be able to access this OT system, you need to first breach an IT system. So basically, this OT system are the crown jewel of this organization. So if I compare like a water plant and a bank, the crown jewel of a bank is probably its trading systems, is like online banking platform. So that's the crown jewel, but that's still within the OT, like the IT environment. Whereas for water plant, the crown jewel is all this OT environment that will provide the ability to conduct all the operations to distribute water through a city or a country. So I will say, obviously, there is specific measure to take in order to, to create like a strong boundary, to create like a strong security between the IT and the OT environment. But it doesn't really change the entire process. It's like if you secure properly your IT environment and you put some relevant security system at the perimeter of the OT environment, you limit the impact. But then it's always come to a point is how are we like the ability to detect an incident proactively? Don't wait until you got an impact on your OT to be able on your OT system to detect it. Try to detect what the threat actors is within your IT environment. Also, we just have to understand that cybersecurity is not or can't be solved by buying a great tool. The great tool has to be properly implemented. People has to know how to use the tool. People has to understand how this is integrated within the system, etc. So I would say back to the OT like question. I mean, it doesn't really change the game. I think it's add a bit of complexity because most of the time on this OT system, you can't really deploy like the basic cybersecurity control that you will be able to deploy on any servers or on a workstation. But you got some mitigation measure to protect them properly. But then it's like we see like the energy crisis going on in Europe. And now the next question is, for example, is Russia going to try to impact any electric like organization in Europe to add a bit more pressure on all the states supporting Ukraine? So all these questions, and that's something that I really find fascinating about cybersecurity is when I started to study cybersecurity, like probably 10 years ago, we saw cybersecurity like a small field in the IT department. I think right now we see it as a global issue where there's more than just an IT like issue or just a business issue, as we say. Like cybersecurity is not an IT problem; it's a business like problem. But I think it's even broader than that. There's all these geopolitical issues, like what are you going to do if you know that Russia is conducting some cyber operation against your state? What are you going to do if China is conducting some cyber espionage against like critical system? And that can't be answered by like the cybersecurity community only. It has to be answered by the politician. And then it's more like an issue of relationship or international relation between states. Do we close our eyes? Do we pretend we haven't seen like China conducting some cyber espionage? And there's all that point about like doing some partnership with some organization that we don't really know how they work. I was in Switzerland. I'm Swiss originally, and right now Switzerland signed a partnership with Alibaba Cloud. And I'm a bit concerned because if you understand the complexity of this environment and the ability that China could have to basically monitor or maybe have access to that cloud environment, we don't know. I don't know. But I mean, is it a wise decision? People take decision without having the broad picture. So we don't have all the answers, but I think it's very important to understand that cybersecurity came from like a small IT department, and now there's this massive, like global issue where it has to be solved by like private company, but also public sector, and also politician has to like sometime would have to follow up on that and to take decision that organization can't take.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Speaking of, being an international problem, we've seen a rise in compliance regulations and standards over the past, 5 or 6 years. GDPR, the California, the Consumer Protection Act. I think there's another couple states in the U.S. where those are going to go into effect. We have PAIDA in Canada and so forth. Those are being implemented to help ensure that organizations have best practices and standards in place so that the likelihood of malicious breaches taking place are mitigated. But some of those actually extend into incident response as well. You not only need to be prepared and trying to prevent a malicious breach from taking place, but you also need to be ready to respond to one. Can you speak to how those compliance regulations really affect both sides of the spectrum?
So I think I mean, we've seen so many regulations, and I think that's sometimes the biggest challenge for an organization. Like, for example, from highly regulated industry like banking, because they have to deal with the FINMA in Switzerland, with the SEC in the US, with like the MIS in Singapore, like with all this regulation that has to. So I think there is a large complexity over there. I think the main two objective of all this regulation is first to improve and increase the cyber security of the organizations um, overall, but also to force organizations to publicly announce, or at least announce to the regulators when they got breached. So I think I think there's some large advantages to have this regulation in place because it forces organization to implement and spend some money and to understand the complexity of it. I think it's important to be careful, not to be compliance driven, to trying to check out the compliance or the regulation to say, okay, cool, I've got a firewall, but like, it was my technology properly implemented? So I think it's like very important to follow regulation and standards, but also just to ensure that we're not doing that to be compliant, but we are doing that in order to improve our cybersecurity posture and cybersecurity resiliency. So I just want to ensure that the organization will do that to become more cyber resilient in terms of just comply to any regulation. And I think there's like some good standard, like the CISA is doing some great work about like there's a new campaign like Shields Up, where they just publicly announced and released a great work about like critical the CIS critical infrastructure security like system to put in place. So on top of being compliant, like organization could rely on some great work done by like, for example, the CISA in terms of how can we implement some security control. And there's like some good stuff happening where like that's the minimum standard that organization should have, but also where they understand the level of effort with like they take in consideration the level of effort and the cost of implementation, like that people could just quickly prioritize. So like there's some quick win. I mean, like I've seen like so many organizations without multi-factor authentication. I mean, today, if you can access your organization with a simple like credential, like email address and a password to access your entire organization remotely, I mean, that's a massive mistake. We've seen so many organizations getting breached by not having MFA in place. Obviously, if you still have MFA and like you multi-factor is like an SMS, this is like obsolete right now. But that will still provide the ability to the organization to make it more complex for the threat actors to breach into the network. Build first strong foundation and then improve from there, move from there. Don't try to like put everything and like within 1 year to like improve globally your cyber security. Is like, no, it's not going to work. It's like we see organization like trying to do zero trust. It's like zero trust is a new trend. And like people say, oh, which product can I buy to do zero trust? Zero trust is not a technology. Zero trust is a concept. So most organizations already have in place element to do zero trust. Like, do we have a strong identity and access management? And like that kind of stuff. How can we build zero trust? Don't try to be zero trust within the next 6 or 12 months because you want to get a promotion. Build like a 3 years program where you build first a strong identity and access management. And then you check exactly what's your entity, what's your device, what's the data. And like you put them all together and then you can build from it.
And I have one last question for you. You brought up zero trust and the network and the fact that it's a concept. And it's proliferated partially because of Palo Alto Networks and the fact that it came from them. It's about the firewall, it's about the network. But organizations, particularly like with the Executive Order 14028 that came out from the White House last year, I guess it was, that we had a couple subsequent memorandums come out associated with it. There's the realization that it's much broader in scope and it's extending into the arena of content, right? Bad actors typically try to breach the network because they're trying to access private, critical content that is actually meaningful and they can hold for ransom. They can sell on the dark web. and other malicious activities. How do you see, zero trust extending to content as a concept that, who accesses content, when, where, with what device, and so forth, will have least privileged access applied to it from a zero trust standpoint?
I think you almost answer your question while asking the question. I mean, I think first is like it's really like understanding what's your assets. And what I mean asset is not only like data, but it's like, as I said, like identity, device, network, data. And obviously there's all the part of like, do you have the right visibility within your network? Can you monitor that? And after that, once you understand all your assets and data, it's like zero trust is just about verifying constantly and saying, okay, that user want to access that data. Let me verify his identity first. But then it's like, I'm just going to provide them the least privilege. So to only access that, if that's like user want to access something else, it will probably have to authenticate again at a certain like within like again, and sometimes the authentication has to happen like every 5-10 minutes. So I would say like it's just about limiting access and providing minimum privilege. And as you say, it could be confusing because zero trust came from like Palo Alto network. So people say, "Oh, cool, I'm going to buy that great product." But again, and especially about zero trust, everyone is trying to move there. I think that's a good trend. But take your time. Like, don't wait 10 years. But I will say, build strong foundation before moving there. Because if you don't build a strong foundation, if you don't understand the type of data or your identity first, I mean, you're going to build something that's not going to be able to work. So, I mean, zero trust is a complex topic. I love that topic. And I would say, like, also in that journey, maybe ask for the help or like experts in that field. How can we build that? Because if you never build a zero trust network before, it's always hard to build it the first time. So there's some good company helping to build that and some great experts. To hire a great expert or work with a good consultancy company, it's all about foundation. We understand the complexity of it, but that's also why don't rely on a single protection. We always speak about defensive depth, and I've been like reading about years about that. But that's true. I have a defensive in depth security because we're talking about like the new trends, and like last year we saw that almost 40% of the initial vectors for a cyber attack was an exploit. I mean, you won't be able to detect that, but why will you be able to detect is like privilege escalation, the next step on the threat actors, like threat actors trying to move laterally. So even if you don't manage to identify a specific step from the threat actors, just try to catch him at the next phase. That's why I was said during a purple team exercise, which is, by the way, purple team exercise. First, that's my favorite type of exercise because when you got a strong and like when you got a strong and mature organization, the best way to be able to improve it is to have a red teamers like trying to breach into your network. But also we provide the ability to have your blue team understand and like being able to detect. And if there's one step missing, if you are not able to detect, is like, do we have the logs? Do we have the right tool for that? Do we have the right logic behind that? And if not, you can build from there. And as I always say to clients, there are some stuff that are like highly detectable, but don't focus too much on that. Because even if that step is like very hard to be detected, there's few steps before and few steps after. So just focus on that. Focus on where you can have a large impact. Is, if I may just add one more thing, there's so many TTPs, like so many technique and procedures used by threat actors to conduct cyber incidents. But focus on the TTPs that matter. There are TTPs that are heavily used by threat actors to conduct cyber incidents. So focus on these TTPs and ensure that you be able to detect them. Because if you're able to detect these TTPs, you are able to detect, I don't know, let's say like 80% or 90%. Don't try to focus on detecting a TTPs which was used like once, like last year. Once last year, there's no point. Don't get me wrong, there's no point, but like focus on what's matter. That's it.
this wraps up another Kitecast episode. Viewers, we appreciate your time. If you're interested in watching other Kitecast episodes, go to kiteworks.com/kitecast. Thanks, Sylvain. I appreciate your time today. It was a great conversation.